November 23, 1944. The Hürtgen Forest, German-Belgian border. 1645 hours. The forest does not smell like pine. It smells of wet rot, cordite, and the copper tang of old blood. Obergefreiter, Corporal Hans Müller, crouches in a foxhole that is half filled with freezing sludge. Above him, the tall fir trees of the Hürtgenwald, the green hell, shudder under the impact of distant artillery. Every few minutes, a shell clicks a treetop, detonating downward in a tree burst, spraying the ground with jagged steel and splintered wood. Hans is 22, but his face is gray and lined, the face of an old man. He pulls his greatcoat tighter around his shoulders. It is damp wool, heavy and useless against the biting cold. "Anything?" asks the boy next to him. The boy is barely 17, a Volksgrenadier replacement. He is clutching a Kar-98K rifle with trembling hands. He isn't shaking from fear, though there is plenty of that. He is shaking from caloric deficiency. "Quiet," Hans snaps, but there is no heat in his voice. He reaches into his bread bag and pulls out their dinner. It is a small, hard lump of Kommissbrot, army bread. By late 1944, the recipe has changed. It is no longer wheat and rye. It is a mixture of potato flour, pea meal, and sawdust. Hans breaks it in half. It crumbles like dry clay. "Eat," Hans whispers, handing the larger piece to the boy. "Chew it slowly," tricks the stomach. They eat in silence. The bread tastes like dirt. Their last hot meal was 3 days ago. A watery soup made from a dead artillery horse found near the road. The Wehrmacht is starving. The supply lines are shattered by Allied Jabos, fighter bombers. Every truck that moves in daylight is strafed. Across the valley, only 300 yards away, lies the American line. Hans peers through the gloom. The Americans are quiet today. Usually, by now, they would be probing with mortars or sending patrols into the mist. But the woods are eerily silent. "Maybe they're pulling back," the boy whispers hopefully. Hans shakes his head. The Ammies never pull back. They are waiting. Maybe they're out of ammo too. But Hans is wrong. The Americans are not out of ammo, and they are certainly not starving. 10 miles west, U.S. Army Quartermaster Depot, 1700 hours. While Hans chokes down sawdust bread, a different kind of war is being fought in the American rear. It is a war of logistics, and the weapon of choice is poultry. Captain James O'Leary stands on the loading dock, clipboard in hand, watching a scene that would seem hallucinatory to the Germans across the line. "Careful with those crates," O'Leary bellows. "That's high-value cargo." He isn't talking about tank shells. He is talking about Turkey. Months ago, the Pentagon made a promise. Every American soldier, no matter where he was, from the jungles of Saipan to the freezing foxholes of Germany, would have a traditional hot turkey dinner for Thanksgiving. It was a logistical nightmare. It required refrigerator ships. It required a turkey run of thousands of trucks, the Red Ball Express, prioritizing meat over ammunition. In the field kitchens, the scene is chaotic. Steam rises from massive 20-gallon aluminum pots. Mess Sergeant Big Mike Kowalski is sweating despite the freezing air. He is basting hundreds of birds. The air is thick, rich, and heavy, with the scent of sage, roasting fat, and cranberry sauce. "All right, listen up," Kowalski shouts to his cooks. "We pack 'em into the Marmite cans. Heat retention is priority 1. I want those boys on the line to burn their tongues, you hear me? If it's cold, it's garbage." The cooks shovel the meat, the stuffing, and the candied yams into the insulated M1941 containers. These green steel canisters are designed to keep food hot for hours. They are loaded onto 2.5-ton trucks. The drivers check their weapons. They have to drive this cargo right up to the company command posts, often under mortar fire. "This is insane," a private mutters, heaving a container of mashed potatoes onto the truck bed, "risking our necks for a bird." "It ain't about the bird, kid," Kowalski says, wiping grease from his forehead. "It's about letting those Krauts know that we can do this. We can fight a war and still eat like kings." The convoy engines roar to life. They rumble eastward toward the dark tree line of the Hürtgen. They are carrying 1.6 tons of morale, and they are about to unleash a psychological weapon more devastating than any bomb. November 23, 1944. U.S. Army Front Line, Sector G. 1900 hours. The darkness in the forest is absolute. Light discipline is strictly enforced. A single lit cigarette can draw sniper fire from 50 yards away. Private First Class Joey Moretti is huddled in a hole that smells of wet wool and fear. He is 19 years old, from Brooklyn. His stomach is growling, a constant, gnawing reminder that C-rations, cold beans, and hash are barely enough to keep a man moving in this weather. Suddenly, a shadow moves in the trench line behind him. "Password," Moretti hisses, his thumb sliding the safety off his M1 Garand. "Mickey," a voice whispers back. "Mouse," Moretti replies, lowering the rifle. It isn't a relief patrol. It is the chow runners. Two men are dragging a heavy, olive-drab steel cylinder through the mud. It looks like a depth charge. "Mess sergeant sends his regards," the runner grunts, wrestling the clamps of the M1941 insulated container. "Get your mess kits out, boys, fast." Moretti fumbles for his tin plate. The runner cracks the seal on the canister. Whoosh! A cloud of white steam escapes into the freezing night air. It hits Moretti in the face, warm and thick. The smell is overwhelming. It is the smell of home. It is the smell of his mother's kitchen on a Sunday. Roasted turkey, savory stuffing with onions and celery, sweet candied yams. "I don't believe it," Moretti whispers, staring at the pile of white meat being slapped onto his tin plate. "It's actually hot." "Cranberry sauce?" the runner asks, holding up a ladle. "You gotta be kidding me," Moretti laughs, a sound that bubbles up from sheer disbelief. "Yeah, hit me." All along the American line, thousands of men are sitting in the mud, weeping quietly as they eat. For 20 minutes, the war stops. There is no shelling, there is no screaming. There is only the clinking of spoons against tin, and the collective sigh of an army being reminded of what they are fighting for. But the forest has its own geography, and tonight, the wind is blowing from the west. German lines 300 yards east, 1915 hours. Obergefreiter Hans Müller wakes up from a doze. He twitches his nose. At first, he thinks he's having a stroke, or perhaps the hunger has finally driven him mad. Olfactory hallucinations are common among starving men. He expects to smell cordite, rotting leaves, and unwashed bodies. Instead, he smells sage. "Carl," he whispers to the young boy, "do you smell that?" The boy is sitting up, his eyes wide in the dark. He is sniffing the air like a hunting dog. "It smells like meat," the boy says, his voice trembling. "Roasted meat and sugar." Hans crawls to the lip of the foxhole. The scent is stronger now. It is drifting through the trees, heavy and undeniable. It is a rich, fatty, savory aroma that triggers a painful spasm in his empty stomach. It's coming from the Army lines, Hans realizes. Down the line, other German soldiers are popping their heads up. The discipline is breaking. Men are ignoring the order to stay hidden. They are standing up, breathing in the air, trying to consume the smell. What are they doing? the boy asks, clutching his stomach. Are they taunting us? No, Hans says, feeling a cold pit of despair open up inside him. They are eating dinner. He closes his eyes. He imagines the scene. He knows the Wehrmacht cannot even get gasoline to its tanks. They are stripping boots off dead soldiers because there are no new ones. And yet, 300 yards away, the enemy has transported a feast across the Atlantic Ocean, driven it through a war zone, and served it hot. It is impossible, a sergeant in the next hole mutters loud enough for them to hear. It is a trick. They are cooking horses. No, Hans replies softly. That is turkey. I remember it from before the war. That is turkey with spices. The realization hits the platoon like a physical blow. It is not just jealousy. It is the terrifying realization of industrial superiority. If the Americans can waste shipping space on cranberries, what does that say about their supply of ammunition? What does that say about their fuel? Hans looks at his piece of sawdust bread, still sitting on the edge of the foxhole. He picks it up. He looks at it with hatred. They have won, Hans whispers. What? The boy asks. The war, Hans says, tossing the bread into the mud. It is over. We are fighting men who eat banquets in the middle of hell. We cannot beat this. Suddenly, the silence is broken, not by gunfire, but by a sound that is even more demoralizing to the freezing Germans. From the American lines, a voice shouts out, full and strong. Hey, Fritz, how do you like the smell? Comes with gravy. Then, laughter. Hundreds of American voices, fed and warm, laughing into the night. Hans slides back down into the bottom of his hole. He pulls his knees to his chest. He doesn't check his rifle. He doesn't watch the perimeter. He just listens to the laughter and the wind. Knowing that the greatest weapon the Americans fired at him today wasn't a bullet. It was a smell. November 24th, 1944. No Man's Land, Hürtgen Forest. 0630 hours. The sun rises like a bruise, purple and cold behind the gray cloud cover. The feast is over. The laughter has died down. Now, the war returns to its grim routine of patrols and probing attacks. Obergefreiter Hans Müller signals for his squad to halt. They are creeping through a dense thicket of fir trees, scanning for American tripwires. The mission is to locate the American machine gun nest that was firing last night. But the young boy, Karl, isn't looking for tripwires. He is looking at the ground. Hans, Karl whispers, stopping dead in his tracks. Look! Hans creeps forward. In a small clearing, the snow has been trampled into brown slush. The Americans had a listening post here during the night. But they pulled back at dawn. Scattered across the snow is the debris of abundance. There are empty cardboard cartons coated in wax. There are tin cans with the lids bent back, traces of bright orange sweet potatoes clinging to the rims. And there, lying in the dirt like the skeletal remains of a prehistoric creature, is the carcass of a turkey. It has been picked mostly clean, but to the starving Germans, it looks like a treasure chest. Shreds of dark meat still cling to the bone. A glob of congealed white fat sits on the cartilage. Karl drops his rifle. He falls to his knees in the mud. He doesn't care about snipers. He doesn't care about mines. He crawls toward the carcass. Karl, don't, Hans hisses, grabbing the boy's collar. It could be booby-trapped. Karl shakes him off with a strength born of desperation. He grabs the turkey bone. He tears at the cold, leftover meat with his teeth, gnawing on the cartilage, licking the fat from his fingers. It is a grotesque sight. A soldier of the Third Reich, the supposed master race, scavenging like a feral dog in the trash of his enemy. Hans stands over him, his Mauser rifle in hand. He looks at the boy, then he looks at the trash. He sees a wrapper for a Hershey's Tropical chocolate bar. He sees a half-empty pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes, crushed into the snow, cigarettes that would trade for a month's wages in Berlin. The Americans didn't even finish them. They just threw them away. This is the moment the propaganda dies. For years, Goebbels had told them that the Americans were weak, that their ships were being sunk by U-boats, that their economy was collapsing. Yet here lies the proof. The Americans are so rich they can throw away cigarettes. They can leave meat on the bone. Karl stops eating. He sits back on his heels, clutching the bone, tears streaming down his dirty face. "I'm not going back, Hans," Karl says quietly. Hans stiffens. "Get up, soldier. That is an order." "No," Karl says, shaking his head. He looks toward the American lines, hidden in the mist. "They have food, Hans. They have warm coats. If I go back to our line, I will die. I will freeze or I will starve." He stands up slowly. He leaves his rifle lying in the mud. He unbuckles his ammo belt and lets it drop. "You can shoot me," Karl says, looking Hans in the eye. "But I am walking west." Hans raises his rifle. The penalty for desertion is death, summary execution. It is his duty as an Obergefreiter to shoot this boy in the back. He aligns the iron sights on Karl's retreating figure. Karl begins to walk toward the enemy. He raises his hands in the air. "Kamerad," Karl shouts, his voice cracking. "Don't shoot! I'm coming over!" Hans's finger tightens on the trigger. He takes a breath. He thinks of the sawdust bread. He thinks of the smell of sage drifting on the wind. He lowers the rifle. He watches as two American GIs emerge from the mist, weapons raised. They don't fire. They see the unarmed boy. One of the Americans reaches into his pocket and pulls out something, a chocolate bar. He tosses it to Karl. Hans watches the boy catch it. He watches the Americans wave him into their lines. Hans turns around. He is alone in the clearing. He looks down at the cigarette pack in the snow. He picks it up, brushes it off, and puts it in his pocket. Then, he turns back toward the German lines, walking heavily, a man who knows he is defending a corpse. November 25, 1944. German Sector HQ. 900 hours. The report lands on the desk of General Major Burkhardt. It is not an isolated incident. Desertions are up 40% in the last 24 hours, the adjutant reports, his voice tight. Patrols are not returning. We're finding weapons left in the field. Burkhardt rubs his temples. He has received the intelligence reports about the Thanksgiving offensive. He knows about the turkey. "It is a chemical weapon," Burkhardt mutters. "They are using food as a weapon." "Shall we order the execution of the deserters' families?" the adjutant asks, reciting the standard SS directive. "You cannot execute hunger," Burkhardt snaps. "We're fighting a ghost. We tell the men, the Americans are monsters, and the Americans throw them chocolate. We tell them we are winning, and they smell the truth on the wind." The general walks to the window. The Hürtgen Forest is a meat grinder. He has lost 10,000 men in these woods. But today, he realizes he hasn't just lost men. He has lost the argument. The Thanksgiving dinner of 1944 didn't win the war tactically. It didn't take a hill or destroy a bunker. But it broke the spiritual spine of the common German soldier. It proved that no amount of fanaticism could compete with a nation that could roast a bird in a blast furnace. The Battle of the Hürtgen Forest dragged on for another month. It was one of the bloodiest and most useless battles of the war. But the legend of the turkey drop spread through the German ranks like a virus. Prisoners captured in the following weeks often asked their captors the same question. Is it true? Did you really have turkey? When the Americans said yes, the fight went out of the Germans' eyes. Hans Müller survived the war. He spent 3 years in a POW camp in Pennsylvania. Years later, he would tell his grandchildren about the worst night of his life. He didn't talk about the artillery or the dying friends. He talked about the smell of sage. That was the night the Third Reich ended, he would say. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with the smell of gravy.